Just a little warning, so you know this is going to be a very frank and open conversation. So if there's anything you don't want to hear before you see it, you might want to stop now.
Hi, we're the Russo brothers, and we're going to talk about the biggest moments in the MCU. I am Iron Man. Favreau really did set the tone for the Marvel Universe in that film. It is a distinctive tone from other superhero films in a way that it marries humor with spectacle, and you know, it spawned 22 films.
Yeah, and I think that the tone that was set there was like what made us want to become a part of the MCU one day.
Kill power.
Tony Stark's I Am Iron Man moment is really the moment that defines superheroes in the Marvel Universe. As presented to the audience, he is the first known superhero, and he's the first known hero in that universe. Of course, if you've seen Captain Marvel, you'll know that both she and Captain America came before him, but he is the linchpin to what will be the Avengers moving forward.
You know, I remember, watching the original Iron Man movie in the movie theater. It made a huge impression on both Joe and I, and particularly the end of the film when he says, "I am Iron Man," because up until that moment, superhero movies had been so focused on secret identities and etc. For him to actually just blurt it out at the end of the movie like that, I mean, we have a very subversive approach to how we like to look at storytelling and sort of think about pop culture, and that moment was so sort of brilliantly and unexpectedly subversive that it really excited us.
It is one thing to question the official story and another thing entirely to make wild accusations or insinuate that I'm a superhero.
I never said you were a superhero.
Didn't?
Mm-mm.
Well, good, because that would be outlandish and fantastic. I'm just not the hero type, clearly, with this laundry list of character defects, all the mistakes I made, largely public. Yeah, okay. Yeah. The truth is, I am Iron Man.
Now that line, while it made a huge impression on us at the time, the idea of calling back to that line to end Endgame
came to us very late in the process. We were an editorial. In fact, the last thing that we ever shot on Avengers Endgame was Robert Downey saying, "I am Iron Man," and clicking his fingers. We shot that in January of this year in our final reshoots. And originally he said, he didn't say anything to Thanos. He smiled and clicked his fingers. It felt empty to us in editorial. And, Thanos would say, "I'm inevitable," and then Tony would smile back and click his fingers. And we just felt like it didn't service the moment correctly, and it didn't fulfill his journey as a character. And we're sitting there with our editor, Jeff Ford, and he said, "Thanos says I am inevitable. What if Tony just responded, and I am Iron Man?" And we went, get out the cameras.
We have to shoot that.
We're shooting this immediately.
Yeah.
Ended up being the last thing. Poetically, it ended up being the last thing we shot.
And all credit to Jeff Ford, our editor. He edited every MCU movie we've done, and he's edited several others as well. He's one of the creative cornerstones of the MCU. So I think it's very fitting that he would have come up with that line that sort of pays off the entire series so well. I could do this all day.
I can do this all day.
I think the line, "I could do this all day," is really representative of who Cap is as a character. It represents that ethic in him that he will not quit until the fight is won, and that he will always stand on the side of right. Now, it's interesting because that line is interpreted several different ways and with different inflections. and different tones throughout the Marvel Universe. He says it in First Avenger.
You just don't know when to give up, do you?
I can do this all day.
And it's a very earnest announcement of who he is as a character. He says it in Civil War, ironically, to Tony at the end of the film.
I could do this all day.
And then he says it to himself in Avengers Endgame, a younger, spunkier version of Cap who wears spandex says it to an older, wiser version of Cap who doesn't want to hear it. And I think that really illustrates a really interesting arc for him as a character. If you just study that line, you can see how he moved throughout the Marvel Universe from Patriot, basically, to Insurgent, and then to sort of wise and tough war vet at the very end. The elevator fight scene. The first scene that we shot in The Winter Soldier was the elevator fight scene,
which was our very first scene we shot in the MCU. So
it was a very important
big
scene to us.
Beginning.
Emotionally, metaphorically, for a lot of reasons, we felt like the style of fighting in the elevator was what was going to make this movie distinctive. It was visceral, it was hard-hitting, it was aggressive, it was violent, and it felt very real world to us. What we were trying to do was take Cap and pull him into some semblance of psychological realism, and with it we were trying to drag, our corner of the MCU into that as well. And I think that elevator sequence not only represents mistrust and subversion, but it also represents a change in Cap forever. He will never be the same character again when he comes out of that elevator.
One of the great thrills of that movie is we got to challenge Cap's devotion to authority and to the country he's served. Because when we were pushing that movie, it's like, how do you challenge a character like Captain America? He's so strong, he's so resolute, he's so single-minded in his purpose. And we thought it was very important to find a way to undermine that, to strip away everything that he was relying on.
Captain, somebody murdered my friend. I'm going to find out why. Anyone gets in my way, they're going to regret it. Anyone.
Understood.
So this moment of revelation, when he realizes that he can't trust the team that he's serving, the authorities that he's serving, happens in about in the middle of the movie in an elevator when he's in the Triskelion. He's just finished talking to Robert Redford. He's just lied to a superior, presumably for the first time in his life. That's not something Captain America would normally do, but he's getting a little nervous about what's happening, and he doesn't know quite how to react or who to trust. Then he gets in an elevator after that meeting, and he realizes in that elevator that he's surrounded not by allies that he believed, as he previously believed, but by enemies. And it's a huge turning point in Captain America's arc, and I think in the entire MCU, where Cap realizes that he's alone. And I think that's a real important marker on his journey, which goes from sort of dutiful, selfless servant to an actualized individual. At that moment, he realizes he's alone in that elevator, and he has to fight his way out. And that's the beginning of his road to Peggy Carter at the end of Endgame.
It's a fulcrum shift for the entire MCU from Phase 1 to Phase 2. I think where, they're going down the rabbit hole and it's starting to deconstruct itself, and everything is not as simple as it appears. And it takes us on a journey all the way to the end of Endgame.
hands in the air. Give it up, Roger. Get that door open. You got nowhere to go.
There was no doubt we were being self-referential with the Hail Hydra moment in the elevator in Endgame, where Cap leans in and says Hail Hydra. But also, it's just it's a way to symbolize how he has changed as a character. You know, that he no longer needs to punch his way out of that elevator. That, you know, the efficiency is critical for him in this moment, and he uses efficiency, even though he could have won the other way as well. And I think that that's fun for the audience to see the growth in him as a character. It's not only referential to the current comic run, but it's referential to who he is as a character.
It just speaks to how far he's come.
Spider-Man gets introduced into the MCU. We knew we were doing a build-up to Spider-Man. He was my favorite character growing up. You know, we fought really hard to get him in that movie. There's an unprecedented deal done between Disney and Sony to get our hands on Spider-Man for Civil War.
Yeah, it was kind
Kevin
of a miracle.
went through a lot to make that deal happen.
Yeah.
But we were relentless that we needed him for the movie. And as great producers do, he obliged and made it happen. And so then we knew we needed an incredible introduction for the character. And you know, it starts with a verbal tee-up from Downey and a smile. And then a cut to a title card that says Queen. And I think that really, you know, for everyone who knows the character, it was a jolt of excitement in the theater. There's a needle drop on the card. And then, you know, an introduction into the first, you know, teenage actor to actually play Spider-Man.
Oh, Mr. Parker.
What are you doing? Hey, I'm Peter.
Tom Holland was an actor that we fought very hard for to play the part. We wanted to make sure that we had a really boyish, you know, actor in that role, because that's what I remembered that I loved about the character and what I identified with. And it also creates diversification in the Marvel Universe just in terms of heroes. There's older heroes, there's younger heroes. And younger heroes have different, you know, issues that they're dealing with, and we'll have a different perspective on problems as they arise. And you know, I think one of our favorite directing moments from any of the Marvel films was that first scene where Tony Stark shows up to recruit Peter Parker in Peter's very small bedroom, and the way that Downey jumped in and helped Tom Holland with his blocking in that scene. We just marveled at Robert, and we're like, gosh, he's creating a star-making performance through blocking with Tom.
So, you're the Spiderling, crime-fighting spider. You're Spider-Boy?
Spider-Man.
Not in that onesie, you're not.
It's not a onesie. I can't believe this. I was actually having a really good day today, you know, Mr. Stark. Didn't miss my train. This perfectly good DVD player was just sitting there, and algebra test. Nailed it.
Who else knows? Anybody?
Nobody.
I mean, the best gift you can give to an actor is to put them in a scene with Robert Downey Jr. I mean, nobody's going to bring out more out of you because he's such an amazing actor, and he did. It was to see him work with Tom in that scene and really make sure that we were maximizing everything. We were pulling everything out of Tom that we possibly could. Downey worked very hard in that scene, and it was always grateful to him for that.
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
So you want to look out for the little guy, you want to do your part, make the world a better place, all that, right?
Yeah, just looking out for the little guy. That's what it is.
We weren't looking at the other films for inspiration. We were looking at the comic books.
Exactly. We wanted to be
Yeah.
very truthful to him as a teenager. That was most important to us in this iteration of the character, is to really run at, on a stylistic level, on a casting level, etc., this idea that this is a kid, a real kid in New York City. And that fed the design of his apartment, certainly, obviously, the casting of Tom, first and foremost. Yeah, we're really looking on a detail level. How do we bring that everyday teenager experience into the equation for that character?
What spoke to me when I was 10 and I read Spider-Man comics was that Peter Parker was Peter Pan type character, this boy genius who suddenly had an incredible amount of responsibility thrust on him, and through very tragic circumstances. And it felt both, emotional and tragic and fun, all wrapped up into one. And I didn't know how to process it as a kid. And sometimes, the books would make me really sad, and sometimes the books would make me laugh. But they always had this sort of Shakespearean element, and he was this sort of, clown that moved through the world and brought mirth everywhere he went. And so that was what was so important to us, is that we add that element to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's what we were chasing.
Was there any debate over synthetic versus organic fluid?
That's a good question. Yeah.
We did have a debate about synthetic versus organic, and I think ultimately, we just felt like it was more interesting to go with synthetic, and that was part of his brain, and it's just his brain is part of his power. Peter Parker.
I think that's really what tilted it for us. Is we again, when you're introducing Spider-Man, it's not a standalone movie. He's a small part of an ensemble, so we don't have a lot of screen time to tell his story. And I think leaning on the synthetic choice for his webbing was just a way for us to help pull out his intellect in some small ways in this limited amount of screen time that we had.
You know what I think is really cool? This webbing. The tensile strength is off the charts. Who manufactured that?
I did.
His actual reveal in Civil War, his costumed reveal, is on the tarmac when Tony calls for underoos. And again, we like doing little teases or lead-ups to characters. And everybody knows what that means immediately. And then it's shot in a certain way where there's a shadow and a web, and he's flared in the sun, and he lands, and he is the first thing that he's done in costume is a steel cap shield from him, which of course is an iconic moment.
Underoos!
And a costume upgrade that Tony Stark provided for him, by the way.
Yeah. And then we thought it was very funny that, you're injecting this kid into a very tense situation, but he has no loyalties one way or the other. I mean, he's just there to do what Tony's asking him to do. And he overtalks a little bit, and Tony has to tell him to shut up and respect the situation.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, I could have stuck the landing a little better. It's just a new suit. Wait, it's nothing. Mr. Stark, it's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't really need to start a conversation.
Okay. Captain? Big fan of Spider-Man?
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. Just
Hey, everyone.
good job.
But we wanted a very auspicious entry for Spider-Man, and something that spoke to, like, this is a game changer in the MCU. And I think that was the best thing that we could come up with, is the idea of stripping Cap's shield from him, which is, very hard to do. Captain America can lift Mjolnir. Well, when we saw that moment in Age of Ultron where they're all trying to pick up the hammer, and Cap seems to move it in a way
Ever so slightly.
Yeah, in a way where you're not quite sure, did I see that, did I not see that? Did he move it and not want to embarrass Thor?
Thor is also not sure
Yeah.
whether Cap did it. There's that real moment of trepidation on the part of Thor.
But I think for us, like everybody who saw that moment, you just can't forget it, and you want to go back there on a storytelling
It
level.
ignites your imagination.
Come on, Cap.
Nothing.
I don't think Cap was interested in embarrassing Thor.
Yeah.
or undermining his.
But what's great about
his self-belief in any way, because Thor is already a character who struggles with self-belief.
But he didn't know. But Cap didn't know until he tried that he could actually move it. So it's very fun to see him reverse himself in a millisecond like that. Fortunately, I remember just sitting around the writing room with Marcus and McFeely. I can't remember how it initially came up, but
I think it might have been Kevin's pitch.
It might have been Kevin Feige's pitch that we sort of revisit that concept and pull it forward to fruition.
That was also, we'll admit that we snuck into a screening on opening night in Westwood, the Village Theater, and the moment where Cap caught the hammer, the way that the audience responded, made 6.5 years of very hard work well worth it. The snap. So the snap is it's just part of our philosophy of the way that we look at popular movies, is that the intention of making a movie like this of this scale is to reach a global audience with the film. That's why they're called popular movies, and you want to engage them on a very visceral level, because this generation is about global conversation. And social media is a driver for pop culture, and so we like to make really disruptive choices in our storytelling that get people talking, and invite them into the conversation. We grew up film geeks and spent our entire childhood talking about movies and arguing about our favorite characters and talking about our favorite moments and walking out of Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi and doing the same things that are done today, but just within our little group of friends. Now, you can have a friend in India and Japan and the UK that you talk to online about the same things. And so we're trying to give that same experience back that made us so happy when we were kids, and we're trying to give those kinds of stories to the world. And we can do that by making surprising and aggressive choices that connect them on an emotional level and get them talking to one another. And certainly, Thanos snapping his fingers and winning at the end of that movie was going to generate a discussion.
We think very specifically about each of the characters in every narrative that we do. In Infinity War, we're just thinking about where does a character begin, where do they end. We knew we were in Infinity War, we were hurling toward a final ending in Endgame. So Infinity War, a lot of the narratives in Infinity War were about how did we want to set ourselves up for the story that we wanted to tell in Endgame. So our process of deciding who sort of was blipped away by Thanos and who wasn't was based upon where we wanted to go with the storytelling in Endgame, and it was very specific to that.
I don't feel so good.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir. Please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
We knew that in wrapping up the story in Avengers Endgame, we were mostly trying to close the narratives of the original Avengers. So those characters were preserved so that they could their final acts could be played out in Endgame. The Guardians of the Galaxy become the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Well, certainly at the end of Guardians, when they truly become a family, I think it's maybe a Groot's sacrifice at the end of the movie. That would certainly qualify, because the Guardians are a whole different tone and a different, subset of characters that, can intermingle with and crash into, the original trajectory of the Marvel Universe. I think it shook things up in a way that was spectacular, and it hasn't been the same since. And certainly, Infinity War and Endgame wouldn't be what they are without the presence of the Guardians.
You're immortal. How?
You said it yourself, bitch. We're the Guardians of the Galaxy.
So those were just a few of our favorite moments in the MCU. I know there are many more that we have, and I'm sure that you have. So if you want to comment below about what those are, hopefully we can continue this conversation.